And a very warm welcome. My name's David Lorimer, and it's a real pleasure to welcome you to this very important event with Vandana Shiva and colleagues and friends from the UK as well. I'm just going to share my screen briefly, and so that just to make a very short introduction with a couple of quotations. You have to have the right thing pointing, as you know. So this morning we're talking about regenerating soil, regenerating health, and I regard this as absolutely critical in terms of the future of the planet, and not as well as many other species and plants and so forth. And so I've been talking about regeneration not as long as Vandana, of course, but in the last few years I've really been emphasizing this. And I want to quote Vandana, where she says here, regenerative agriculture provides answers to the soil crisis, the food crisis, the climate crisis, and the crisis of democracy. So we're not just talking about agriculture here, we're talking about the whole system within which our current agriculture is placed and the mechanistic mindset that underlies it. And I'd just like to point out another quotation from Sir Albert Howard, who worked in India for many years and was one of the pioneers of the organic movement in the UK. And he says, the birthright of all living things is health. And we've forgotten that. This law is true for soil, plant, animal, and humans. The health of these four is one connected chain. And elsewhere in an agricultural testament, which was 1940, and so we're talking about 80 years ago, the health of soil, plant, animal, and the human is one and indivisible. And I just want to tell you a little story here. This is part of the legend in the Cathar area of France. The last Cathar Parfait initiate was burned in 1321, and his name is Guillaume Bellibaste. And he famously said that after 700 years, the laurier, the laurel, which is related to this box tree here, would regenerate, and the good men and the good women would come back and help regenerate the culture. So what you can see here, I was at Montségur, which is one of the centers of Catharism. It's a castle about half an hour from where we live. And you can see here, and I'm sorry it's not absolutely that clear, that 2 years ago, the box in all the forests and all the hills and everything was just completely eaten up by this moth. And what's happened here is the most extraordinarily powerful regeneration. So for me, the message is that if we live in harmony with nature, work with the processes of nature, then nature will regenerate, and it's quite straightforward. And I just want to finish before handing over to Vandana with a couple of sentences from her new book, Oneness versus 1%. And those of you who are members will find my review of her book on page 56. And she says here that in the US edition, you'll find an epilogue on the corona crisis. And she says, in fact, the pandemic is not a war. The pandemic is the consequence of war, a war against life. The mechanical mind connected to the money machine of extraction has created the illusion of humans as separate from nature, of nature as dead, inert, raw material to be exploited. But in fact, we are part of the biome. And she goes on, I'll hand the parole, as the French would say, over to her. And it's a huge pleasure and privilege to have you here with us, Vandana. You're one of the great environmental and political activists alive at the moment. And I was being so inspired by your work, and particularly also by the film that was recently being made, Vandana Shiva, the movie, and congratulations on that. And I've been saying to people that I very much hope that you will be nominated and win the Nobel Peace Prize, like Wangari Maathai from Kenya. Your work is absolutely up to that standard of excellence and importance. So before I hand over to you, I'm just going to remark, just on the background, you'll see that Vandana has appropriately a sculpture of Einstein, which she's just explained to me she did herself in her 20s. And then you've also got the goddess of food on the right, Annapurna, and maybe she'll say a bit more about that. And so I thought these images are very beautiful and appropriate. So Vandana, a very warm welcome, and over to you.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you so much for bringing us together, Satish and Colin and Helen, because this community together can make a huge difference in the world. You introduced Einstein and you introduced Annapurna. And in a way, you know, Einstein has been my inspiration, not just studying physics, but going deeper into the issues of physics. And, you know, people like him are the ones who laid the foundations of a more interconnected universe. And I did my PhD in the foundations of quantum theory, and the non-separability that comes from that side of my thinking is in that Einstein bus. And then the non-separability that comes from amazing, amazing indigenous traditions. You know, there's books that say that Columbus discovered sugarcane, and Columbus never came to this side of the world because he got stuck in America. He was coming to India actually, but he got stuck in and discovered America. But Annapurna holds fascinatingly, this is a very, very ancient style of painting, a temple style of painting by hand on cloth. And in her many hands of giving abundance, she's got the 4 amazing crops that are of Indian origin, have been vital to her food security, vital to her culture. She's got in her hand rice, which we evolved 200,000 varieties of from one grass, or Rhiza sativa. And when I started Navdanya, I called on Dr. Risharia, who had gone to England to become a civil servant, but he wanted to be a rice scientist. So he left his career and studied in Cambridge and was in the top rice scientists of the world. And he went and studied with the tribals and the indigenous people and counted 200,000 rice varieties. And then we have in another hand sugarcane, domesticated in the Ganges basin. It used to be a wild grass, and an ancient Jain monk, and Satish was a Jain monk, ancient Jain monk said, you don't ever have to go hungry. This grass has all the nourishment in sugar. And even now there's a little temple where the Jains gather once a year and they give a little blessing of sugarcane juice. But in Navdanya, we make the ancient sugar, gur we call it, gur, shakkar, bura, how many kinds of ways of making natural sugar, not industrial. Interestingly, the industrial sugar in India is called chini, as if it came from China. Maybe the first shipments came from China. So sugarcane is her other hand. And then she's got the banana, which is called the kalpvriksha, which we had 1,500. And I did a big campaign on no to GMO bananas because our dear Mr. Bill Gates was financing Australia to genetically engineer banana to save Indian women from death in childbirth by putting iron in banana. You don't look at iron in banana, you look at potassium, you look at everything else. So, you know, there's this assumption of define everything as empty. Yeah, this is the assumption of the old terra nullius. Yeah, because terra madre is the full earth, the earth who has the generative capacities. And regeneration, therefore, is about stopping the pressures, the pollution, the degradation that prevents that generation. So regeneration actually means recognition of the earth as living, the soil as living, living systems as living. Sadly, the scientific revolution's work was to take life out of terra madre. So scientifically, the earth was turned into terra nullius as being empty, dead earth, but legally she was turned into terra nullius by basically declaring that indigenous people weren't really fully humans. Yeah. Till recently, the Encyclopedia Britannica used to say that the Australian Aborigines are like the fauna and flora. No, they're not humans. Therefore, they don't deserve their land. We can just take their continent. And now more and more literature is coming out how they weren't Bushmen. They were basically the gardeners of our biggest continent. It's called The Greatest Estate on Earth. Brilliant book given to me by Sydney Opera House when I gave my lecture at Sydney Opera House. The greatest estate on earth. They were gardeners 60,000 years ago. So much of the false colonial story makes it look like they were bushmen and hunters and gatherers. And then we jumped into an agriculture that has always been destructive. Now, agriculture became destructive only in recent times. Really, in the colonialism, in terms of creating plantation economies, cotton plantations in America and all the exploitation that went with it, sugarcane plantations in the Caribbean, indigo plantations in India. The plantation economy was destroying the biodiversity and creating monocultures of commodity crops. But the real problems began after the wars, when the poison cartel who had made chemicals for Hitler's Germany wanted to find the markets. And as Albert Howard has so clearly said, industry that had got used to making profits in war chemicals couldn't give up the habit. And then they created the NPK mentality, the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium mentality, and in effect also reduced the earth to an empty container. And when I did my book to understand why the peasants of Punjab were rising in protest in 84, and Punjab is where I'd done my MSc honors in physics, so I knew the land as peaceful, as prosperous, as proud. And then in the 80s, it was a land at war. 30,000 people were killed. And I wanted to understand what happened. And what happened was the Green Revolution, introducing chemicals into farming. But that same year, the disaster of Bhopal took place, where thousands died when a pesticide plant leaked. So, having studied physics, I had to now start studying where did we get poisons in farming? Where did we get chemicals in farming? And of course, it all went back to Hitler's labs, to IG Farben. And while Albert Howard talks about the chemicals in nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, it is Rachel Carson who really woke us up to the harm that pesticides were doing. And she said exactly the same time that companies that had got used to making poisons for warfare couldn't give up their habit and turn them into chemicals. And I just want to mention to all of you who are listening, tomorrow there's going to be a big Swiss referendum. The Swiss don't want pesticides in their food. And they want in a 10-year transition, 100% organic Switzerland. For the first time in Switzerland, such a peaceful country, all those lovely alpine pastures, people trekking in the forest alone for the first time, organic farmers and ecologists who are organizing this referendum are being threatened for life. For the first time, they're saying we've never, ever had this level of threats. And part of it is that, a group that comes out of creating chemicals to kill people in concentration camps, it can only think of war and extermination. It doesn't know democracy. That's why when I wrote that book and wrote that quote, on agroecology and regeneration, I would add, besides democracy, I would today, of course, add health. I would add an answer to pandemics. Another amazing news is that little island south of us in India, Sri Lanka, has decided to go organic, 100% organic. They had a pesticide ban earlier. They had a Roundup ban because of kidney failure. Their scientists worked out this causes Roundup. But now the president just confirmed a policy that in a decade, they're going to get rid of all imports of chemicals. And I think it is such a kind of a message from the universe that a ship carrying nitric acid, which makes explosives and chemical fertilizers, is sinking on the coast of Colombo. So it's like a metaphor of the sinking ship of the poison cartel. Mm. And because the poison cartel had to sell these chemicals, they had to declare the soil as empty, as if it didn't have its own capacity. And we know the soil is living. Albert Howard, who is such a connection to Helen, heads the Soil Association created by Yves Balfour, very close to Albert Howard. Albert Howard was sent to India in 1905. And I want to mention what he says about he says he arrived 1905. He was sent to Pusa, which was Bihar, where the whole indigo plantations were. And that time, there was no agricultural discipline. He was sent as the imperial economic botanist to start a new university called the Pusa Institute to improve Indian farming. And he arrives. And because he was a good scientist, he looked at the soils, they were fertile. He looked at the fields and he found lots of insects, but no pests. And this is what he writes in the Agricultural Testament that was mentioned by you, David. I decided that I could do no better than watch the operations of these peasants and acquire their traditional knowledge as rapidly as possible. For the time being, therefore, I regarded them as my professors of agriculture. It takes a brilliant scientist to acknowledge where real knowledge is. Another group of instructors were obviously the insects and fungi themselves. The methods of the cultivators who followed would result in crops practically free of disease. The insects and fungi would be useful for pointing out unsuitable varieties and methods of farming inappropriate to the locality. And then, of course, he goes on in his other books, Soil and Health, and even in the Agricultural Testament, that a soil teeming with healthy life in the shape of abundant microflora and microfauna will bear healthy plants. And these, when consumed by animals and man, will confer health on animals and man. But an infertile soil, that is one lacking sufficient microbial, fungus, and other life, will pass on some form of deficiency to the plant, and such a plant, in turn, will pass on some form of deficiency to animals and man. So, of course, we have known for at least 100 years, internationally, that the soil's health and our health is interconnected. And therefore, that the regeneration of the soil is the regeneration of our health. But of course, we've known this even longer in ancient cultures. There's 4,000, 5,000-year-old Veda that says, in this handful of soil is your future. You take care of it, it will take care of you. You destroy it, it will destroy you. Now, one of the things that Howard points out is on the small fields of India and China, agriculture is being done today as it's been done for thousands of years. 2-acre plots never being degraded. On the same land, the productivity being maintained because the regeneration of the soil was maintained. And yet we have a degenerating, degrading, hungry agriculture that doesn't know when enough is enough. I think one of the biggest tragedies, besides the sinking ship with nitric acid, is the Amazon being destroyed for growing GMO soya. For growing GMO soya, the richest biodiversity of the planet. GMO soya for eating? No. For animal feed and biofuel. Or making artificial food, and I'll come to that later. So much of the artificial food is made with GMO soya, pretending it is very, very sustainable. But sustainability is the full system, the full cycle, not a fragment, and definitely not the propaganda, not the marketing, not the advertising. You can say anything in today's world, as you will have seen in this lockdown period that we have all witnessed. It's no more clear what's, finally, after a year, the lab leak theory is coming on mainstream media. But good science should have studied it from day one, studied all the possibilities. But we do know that an invasive, wasteful agriculture must occupy more and more land to grow more and more commodities, to starve more and more people, and make more and more people sick. So if you look at any of those elements individually, it's already wasteful and inefficient. But if you connect them all, it is a system that just shouldn't exist. Industrial globalized agriculture should not exist if all the ecological costs, all the health costs, all the climate costs, all the biodiversity costs were taken into account. We do know that most of the recent infectious diseases, from Ebola and Zika and HIV and MERS and the monkey disease in the rainforests of the Western Ghats in India, all of them have come as a result of forest invasions. And invading into the forest, you then invade into the homes of animals, and then this called the spillover effect. And I will come later to the fact that I also find it extremely reductionist. But here is Howard talking about biodiversity of the millions of microbes in the soil giving the health. And we're not looking at it. We know 100 years, we're not looking at it, we got blinders. We are constantly, the new favorite is zoonotic. Well, there's a place to study spillover, there's a place to study gain of function, but there's a place to study the benefits of the microbes in a healthy soil. This constant declaration of entire groups of life forms as enemies to be exterminated is the worldview that has carried on with those war chemicals from Hitler's labs, who could just declare entire groups of people as unclean and needing to be exterminated. And then that extermination vision went to, oh, every insect is an enemy. And all the advertising of the pesticide industry, if you look at it, there's a brilliant book by Will Allen, a dear friend, now 80, but he started the organic farming of cotton in America and has been a pioneer in organic farming. And he wrote a book called The War on Bugs. Half of it is the advertisements of the pesticide industry, that every insect is an enemy to be exterminated. But that includes the bees and the pollinators. So we shouldn't be surprised that 90% of the insects are disappearing and we are facing an insectagadon. Because you've declared war on insects. And now, right now, this idea of war on the microbes is just not understanding that the web of life, the fungi that Albert Howard is talking about, that they weave the web of life, microorganisms weave the web of life outside and within us. Our gut microbiome, 100 trillion microbes. We wouldn't be standing, we wouldn't be healthy without them. So we do need a much, much more humble way. Satish reminds us often, and I say this often, that the word human comes from the word humus, soil. We are soil, we are the earth. And it's the separation that made us think we are masters of the earth, we are owners of the earth. It's just property to grab. But we are children of the earth. And Satish talks about how with this idea that we are children of the earth, therefore we are members of the earth family, goes the quality of humility. So soil gives us the quality of humility. Estrangement from soil gives the spirit of domination and mastery. So health is one, but it's not just one in terms of zoonotic diseases. Health is one from the soil microbes to the plant diversity, to diversity on our plates. And that is why they talk about the Mediterranean diet as being much healthier than other European diets. And in India, in Ayurveda, we say we should always eat 6 tastes. And that's why the thali of the Indian food will always have a little bit of chutney, a little bit of pickle, a little bit of bitter, a little bit of papa. All of that makes a balanced diet. So diversity outside and diversity within is the connector between the soil of health and our health. Look at what the chemicals have done in these short years, because the wars are 80 years. Places like India, we got these poisons in the 60s with the Green Revolution, and in 20 years they had already ruined Punjab, land where I studied. Its lifetime was 20 years. As short as 20 years, Punjab's land is gone, its waters are gone. There's a train that leaves Punjab called the cancer train because of the heavy chemicals and pesticides. But just take synthetic fertilizers. Let's not even talk about of the pesticides. Synthetic fertilizers were introduced. If you look at the literature, besides saying the soil is an empty container for pouring nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, they also said this is land saving because it produces more food. None of it is true. It is land wasting. For example, Punjab never grew rice. Punjab's land was millets, jowar, bajri, makki, sarson. Today, it's the biggest producer of rice in India. So it's a total area added. It is land hungry. You'll have seen a lot of the talk is land saving versus land hungry. Yeah. And they keep talking about ecological organic farming as land hungry. No, it's not. If you do organic farming, you actually regenerate that same piece of land to continue farming in the same place. But when you do chemical farming, you have to abandon the land, desertify it, leave it. And we've done a manifesto in the year of soil in the year 2015. It was the year of soil, but it was also the year when a lot of people were coming through the Mediterranean and sinking in the boats. And I was very troubled by this. And I said, how is it that so many people are being forced to leave their home? And we then realized they're being forced to leave their home because their soils have been destroyed. Syria's soils had been destroyed with the Green Revolution, chemical agriculture, its water had been mined. Then you had climate change, 2009 was a drought. And that drought made all the wells dry. Animals died. 75% of the animals of Syria died. The peasants moved into the city. The revolution of Syria was a peasant revolution, asking for help. They had no food. But before you knew it, in 2011, it became another weapons sale, in a war without end, and all of the things. But even Africa, we got in that manifesto, Our Soil, Our Future, Our Commons, a study on the Lake Chad, which used to be 22,000 square mile lake, supporting 9 million people around it, pastoralists, farmers, fishermen. And then 30 years ago, industrial commodity production took over, that water started to get diverted, and for irrigation of commodity crops, 80% diversion meant no water was going to the lake. The lake started to dry up, the conflict started. And the desertification of Africa is constantly a story of introducing agriculture that isn't suitable. And so you have the refugee crisis. And if we continue this way of desertifying soils, no one will be able to stay home. So you've desertified the soil, you've killed the soil, the nitrogen fertilizers kill that amazing soil organic web about which Harvard is talking, the teeming with life. And then it emits a greenhouse gas, nitrous oxide, which is 100 times more damaging to the climate than carbon dioxide. And if you look at the planetary boundary violations, the biggest violation is biodiversity erosion and nitrogen. Nitrogen fertilizers are doing more damage to this planet, but you rarely find talk about nitrogen. Yeah, that's the planetary boundaries. Here's the biodiversity. This is the nitrogen, and this is the phosphorus. The NPK mentality is killing the planet. It's killing the planet. And every year, 1.3 billion tons of nitrous oxide is being emitted. And my dear recent friend, dear Bill Gates, is actually talking about more fertilizers. This is his solution. His solution to climate catastrophe, climate disaster is more fertilizer. He's saying, I'm even happier than I look, standing in front of a fertilizer distribution factory in Dar es Salaam. He wants more fertilizer. And he's saying, oh, you need lots, you need tons of iron, of nitrogen, and nature can't produce it. He doesn't know that a little earthworm can turn soil with a little bit of organic matter into 5 times the nitrogen of the soil. And in our work in Navdanya, we just finished a 20-year study of comparing the chemical soils and the organic soils in our valley. We did it with the top soil ecologist of India. And let me just read out to you, and this tells you why soil health and our health is so intimately connected. So all we were doing is saving seeds. But to save seeds, we had to grow them out. And to grow them out, we had to grow diversity. And when we had to grow diversity and return the organic matter back to the soil, without realizing it, we weren't just saving seeds, we were regenerating soil. The organic matter is down 14% in the chemical soils. It's up to 99% in the organic soils. Nitrogen, you think in input-output machine, you put this much, it will be there, it's an empty container, you should have more nitrogen, right? No, there's 22% less nitrogen in synthetic nitrogen fertilizer soils, urea soils, and it's 100% more in organic soils where no external input was added. But the soil is not just carbon and nitrogen. The soil is phosphorus, the soil is potassium. We've got 22% less potassium. In chemical, 84% more in the organic. Zinc deficiency is a vital deficiency right now. 37% less zinc in these 20 years, but over 100 years, you could imagine there'll be no zinc at all in the food. But the organic soil had 14% more. And we're not putting any of this as an external input. It's the soil organisms and the web of life that's creating it. Manganese, responsible for attention deficit disorder in children, 17% less in chemical, 14% more in organic. And iron, 12% less in chemical. And then, of course, you're not growing the biodiversity that is the iron-rich foods. And so whether it's the soils or the biodiversity, you actually have a system that is impoverishing the health of the soil and impoverishing our health. And that is why Howard talked about the law of return, that you have to give back in gratitude to the earth. And when you do that, then you have sustainability, then you have regeneration. You just give back a little bit of organic matter. And then amazing things are done by the plants, by the soil organisms. But the plants, for me, the plants is another forgotten relative in all discussions. Why aren't we realizing that in the leaf of a plant is the amazing technology where the sun shines, with the sunshine, and you have carbon dioxide absorbed by photosynthesis, and you have the release of oxygen and carbohydrates. Can you imagine the richness of that technology? And we don't see it as technology because we've internalized the assumption that nature is dead. Nature has no intelligence. But not only do we need to shift from the hydrocarbon paradigm to the carbohydrates that all the plants are producing, and as Howard has written again, everything begins with the green leaf. The sun is the first energy, and then everything is created by the green leaf. That little bit of organic matter creates all the minerals we need for a good diet. But the fungi are 3 to 36-fold more in our soils. And the beneficial bacteria are 246% more. The other day, I was working with the government of Sri Lanka that said we won't do organic, working with the Agriculture Ministry. And and then also with organic movements. And the group of the IG carbon group, the poison cartel, has now organized themselves as they call themselves Crop Life. And I was telling the government of Sri Lanka, they don't know anything about crops. They make poisons, they sell poisons. And they know nothing about life. They know everything about killing life. They don't know anything about life. It's gone to the extent that even the FAO is being hijacked by them. And there's big protest taking place right now to say to the FAO, you cannot partner with the poison makers and the chemical people. And therefore, we need to return to the soil and realize that when we give food to the soil gives us food. We are not producers of food. That's a wrong way of thinking. We are members of the earth family expressing gratitude to the soil gives us food. Brilliant work being done in University of Chico, where they found that the soil is rich in soil fungi, which is what Albert Howard was working on a lot. The photosynthesis above increases 5 times. That means your productivity, your biological productivity is increasing 5 times. You can actually, by nourishing the soil, grow more food. If you don't spray poisons and you let the poor bees and butterflies be, they give you 1/3 of the food you eat. We've done these experiments on the Navdanya farm, and in the chat box, I have put a link to the next course we are offering in October for returning to the earth and regenerating the earth for food, living soil, living seed, and creating living economies at this moment where economies are collapsing and being destroyed. Another very, very significant argument is the seed is an empty container. The seed doesn't know how to produce. And genetically engineered seeds produce more, they don't. They only produce what the original seed does, because all you do is add a chemical seed. And even Norman Borlaug's dwarf varieties, for which they were called miracle seeds, he was given a Nobel Peace Prize for this. This is what started me on studying agriculture with the Green Revolution. And I realized that there are 2 reductionisms taking place. In biodiverse systems, Howard again recognized this. No farm in India is a monoculture, or was, now it is. Mixed farming is the system, diversity is the system. When you grow diversity, you actually grow more food. When you grow a monoculture, you have less, but you have more of a commodity that leaves the farm. And that is why the word yield in agriculture is a very inappropriate word. It does not measure the state of the soil. How do you leave the soil? Did you regenerate it or did you leave it poorer? It does not measure the true economy of the farmer. Did you leave the farmer impoverished? Why are 1,000 farms disappearing in Europe every day? And if your new G7 agreement that has just been signed between Johnson and Biden takes over, the last farmer of England will go. For the British to eat GMO food, chlorinated chicken, fake food, fake meat. And I think this is the time for England to really fight for food democracy, but the whole world must fight for food democracy. We have been saving seeds through Navdanya since 1987. Recent research is now starting to show that native seeds actually have more nutrition. They might not be bigger in weight or bigger in size. And that is a leftover of the Cartesian paradigm that says everything is extension. What you can measure, the weight and the size you can measure. No, everything is quality, as dear Brian Goodwin used to teach us, the science of quality. That is what the masters at Schumacher College is based on, the science of quality. The science of quality is what we need. Your yield doesn't measure what is the quality of the food. It only measures how much in kilograms does it weigh, a very wrong measure for that which will become your bones, your marrow, your brain. It's a very, very wrong measure. But not only is the yield measure wrong in terms of not measuring quality of health, it is wrong in measuring output. So I said, a monoculture is not a biodiverse system. So we will evolve biodiversity productivity, and we will measure nutrition and health per acre. We will not measure yield of a commodity per acre. And the minute you shift to that, suddenly everything changes. Let me just share with you 2 examples. So if you grow corn alone, you might have 5 quintals in an acre. But if you have corn and 4 other crops, you will have 4 quintals of corn, but you will have 5 quintals of other things. So you have 9 total food versus 5. But instead of looking at the reduction of 9 to 5, what's looked at is the increase from 4 to 5 of a monoculture commodity. And this trick has taken the whole world for a ride. Farmers have been destroyed, biodiversity has been destroyed, soil's been destroyed, our health has been destroyed. That's why we must turn to health per acre, nutrition per acre. And this report of Navdania's is available on the Navdania website. Please read it. It's got all the data in nutrition terms. We could feed 2 times India with good, healthy nutrition. We produce more beta carotene, we produce more iron, we produce more vitamin A, which is beta carotene, we produce more calcium. We produce more of everything in the soil and in the plants. And when you take the soil and the plants together, that is producing healthy food from healthy soils. So we are living through the corona epidemic, and we're living through a very, very rapid scale of false solutions. One of the false solutions is the vitamin A rice to increase beta carotene. It is 300 times less efficient in beta carotene than the available alternatives. And if you think of it, and let me just read out to you. So how much do you need for daily vitamin A requirement? 1-2 tablespoons of spinach or amaranth or radish leaves, 4 tablespoons of mustard leaf, or 1 tablespoon of coriander leaves, 1.5 tablespoons of a mint chutney. I think everyone should be eating mint chutney. Just 1 carrot. That's where carotene comes from. 1 mango season for us. 3 fresh apricots. 200 grams of raspberries. We are talking about many, many alternatives. And golden rice forced on the world with 80 patents, again funded by Bill Gates. I don't know why he does everything wrong. Everything that's been proven wrong. We threw the golden rice out of India 20 years ago. I wrote an essay, Blind Approach to Blindness Prevention. 20 years later, he's still pushing it and destroying all of Philippines' laws of biosafety. And then the iron deficiency, anemia, that's everywhere because we've destroyed the iron in the soil, and we have destroyed the iron-rich plants. What we are now getting is, you will not imagine it, people like Google talking about nanoparticles in our blood to address iron deficiency anemia. The Google patent is W020100343191. You can look at those details. Nanoparticles in the blood, untested, 10 to the power minus 9. What they're going to do to all our membranes, no one has assessed. But the head, which only 5-year-old unit of life sciences in Google Life Sciences, the head says we have to defeat Mother Nature. It's this project of wanting to defeat Mother Nature that is still the war against the soil, the war against the earth, the war against our bodies. Our bodies, we are not separate from the earth, contrary to what we've been told repeatedly. We are part of the earth. And as part of the earth, the more we grow biodiversity and nutrition in the soil and in our plants, the more biodiversity we are going to have to nourish us. Ayurveda always knew that it is in the gut that food is digested and health is created. And an ancient shloka says, the contented earth It's from the contented earth we get good food. And that alone is the source of our bones, our marrow, our flesh. A contented earth, that is the source of regenerating soil. We're now realizing the soil by microbiome matches with our gut microbiome. 100 trillion microbes. Amazing neurological activity going on in our gut. 50 to 100 million nerve cells. That's why our gut is being called the enteric nervous system. And can you imagine how out of touch Descartes was when he says, I'm a thinking thing without a body. Thing, he called himself a thing, poor man, not even a being. You know, beings become, beings are, a thing is fixed. A thinking thing without a body. He had no idea that the second brain is the gut, and it is the food we eat that the soil gives us that gives us nourishment. The phytochemicals that come from the soil, there's lots of research now how soils rich in microorganisms create the different nutrients which give to the plants the different phytochemicals that they can express. And the rich phytochemicals then replenish and regenerate our gut health. The multitude of phytochemicals derived from a diet rich in diverse plants, combined with the array of perfectly matching sensory mechanisms in our gut, synchronizes our internal ecosystem, our gut microbiome, with the world around us. And as Emran Mahana says, the gut sensory system is the national security agency of the human body, gathering information from all areas of the digestive system, ignoring the great majority of signals, triggering alarm when something looks suspicious and goes wrong. As it turns out, it's one of the most complex sensory organs of the body. And the alarms come when we eat toxics. The alarms come when we eat uniformity. So all of this craziness about lab-based food, no, you shouldn't eat real food. You know, farming without farmers and farm-free food is the new slogan of people like Gates, the Silicon emperors, want farm-free food. But if the health of the soil and our health is one health, then healing the soil is our duty. And saying farm-free food is another escape, like the Elon Musks and the Jeff Bezos wanting to escape from the earth. And it's this attitude of escape that has always created the will to dominate. Because the idea is, I'll always escape. I always have an escape. I'll destroy the earth, I'll destroy the peasant, I'll destroy the soil organisms, I'll destroy the health and gut of the poor people. But the rich will be able to buy themselves out, including through transhumans. Live forever in frozen nitrogen. In my now 37 years of working in agriculture, both the practice of good farming, the saving of the seeds, the organic farming with Satish, the School of the Seed, the Bij Vidyapeeth, the Earth University, what I have learned in these many years is our participating in humility in the food cycle, in the nutrition cycle, is being an earth citizen. And trying to escape from this cycle is what is causing the harm. People don't even connect. The Mahabharata, Krishna is giving a discourse, and he's saying, this is the cycle of mutual dependence initiated by creation. We've got to be part of the cycle of mutual dependence. That is the growing and giving of good food. That is taking care of the earth. That is regenerating the soil so that our health is regenerated. I feel the mechanistic, militaristic mindset is really on steroids right now. And the billionaires have made so much money in this 1 year, $1 trillion more, and they think they can achieve everything. The Googles can say defeat Mother Earth. Gates can say spread more fertilizer, eat more fake food. And the Bezos can say I'm going off into space, and it's going to be thrilling. because they've never understood the joy of working with the soil. They've never understood the joy of living as part of the web of life. And the food web is the web of life. There's no escape from it. The separation we created from the earth, I have called it ecological apartheid. This apartheid is creating all the other apartheids. The apartheid is the Boer word, the Afrikaans word for separateness and apartness. And they did it on the basis of race. But the apartness of our species being from all the organisms that support us, the apartness of the poor left out of the food system. As it is, 1 billion people were hungry. Now, 250 million have been added to them. And no matter where you look at the images, look at the photos in England, America, India. People are standing in long lines to get food. And we constantly thought it was unimportant. But in India, there's a beautiful culture, and the Sikh religion has kept it alive, the culture of Seva. And they have continued. If you go to a Gurdwara, they will give you free food, because the giving of food is the highest dharma. And they've practiced. The Gurdwaras give food, and they don't look at where's the food coming from. Others give. This is the gift economy of the soil. This is the gift economy of seed. This is the gift economy of our gut microbiome. You give, and in the giving, abundance is created. This has to be translated into the new science, which is anyway emerging, and it has to be connected to the ancient wisdom. Einstein and Annapurna go together, and I think we are just like at that time of the 30s, when the world was at war, the Dust Bowl was happening, depression was happening, but it's in that time the organic movement grew. And the world got united, Rodale, Soil Association, India. I think it's a new moment of unity. And in this new moment of unity, it's good to remember we are the soil, we are of the soil, we are children of the soil. And just returning to the soil, growing a little garden, taking care of our food, giving respect to the farmers, making sure that we don't just defend our small farms, we spread our small farms. And this is my dream for the next 10 years, that we have to turn this planet into a Garden of Eden rather than a toxic desert where everyone is sick, every plant is sick, every animal is sick, every human being is sick. We can be healthy, we can be united in one health, or we can disappear in one collective disease. One health gets cultivated with the soil. Cultivating health is our work. Therefore, regenerating the soil is our work. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Vandana, for incredibly inspiring and informative and data-rich talk. There's many things we want to follow up on. And I think that what you've also highlighted is the absolutely systemic nature of the crisis that we are facing on many different fronts. And I think that's what we in the network are trying to articulate, this systemic nature and the origins of this in this mechanistic, militaristic mindset, which is absolutely destructive and represents a war on life. So I'm going to hand over to Satish now and other panel members to give some of their own views and reactions. So Satish, over to you.
Thank you, David. And thank you, Vandana, for this most wonderful, outstanding, inspiring, and also so informative talk that you have given. Thank you very much. As you were saying, contented soil. That's a beautiful term. First time I've heard from you this term. Maybe you have used it before. And contented soil will make people contented. The contentment of human beings depends on the contentment of the soil and the earth and nature. And what has happened in the last couple of 100 years, all our young people have been educated to think that whatever you have is never enough. Contentment has not been the paradigm of our education, of our industry, of our economy. And so I'm very contented because I moved out of London and came to live in Devon, and I have 2 acres of land. And at this moment, I am growing coriander, basil, asparagus, spinach. They're all at this moment growing, rhubarb, and lots of crops are just coming. And I feel that as an editor, writer, teacher, all that is absolutely fine. But when I'm in my garden, I am most contented because my garden is contented. My soil is, I mean, for the last 40 years, I have lived in this little village of Heartland and gardened. And so when I started Schumacher College, I said, the first thing we have to do at the college is to have a garden. So now, in the last 30 years, we have developed it, and we have got 30 years of Schumacher College, and we have 7 acres of garden. And one of the most wonderful course there is the gardening course, where students come for 6 months and they learn about agroecology, permaculture, organic gardening, all that. And I say to our universities and colleges and schools around the world that every university, every school, every college must have a garden and it must have a land, so that young people are not afraid. How do I grow food? Where the food comes from? They are afraid of nature. They are afraid of growing food. They don't know. They don't know how to grow food. But if we can bring garden in every school, in every university, in every home, and whether you are a prime minister, or whether you are a president, or whether you're a CEO, whether you are a professor, whether you are a doctor, whether you're a lawyer, we all eat food. And therefore, we all need to have a garden. Every single home must be with a garden. Not only every school, every university, but every home. And when I go to some business houses to speak, I say to them, are you a company? They say, yes, we are a company. So I say, tell me, where is your garden? And where is your kitchen? So they say, what do you mean? We are a business house. We are a company. We are not a gardener. We are not a restaurant. I say, but you know the word company comes from compane. Com means together and pane means bread. When you share bread together, then only you are a company. And so if you have no kitchen and no garden, and you don't share bread together, and you don't cook together, you are not a company. So go back and have a garden and have a kitchen in your business house. So if we can bring this idea that food is our basic nourishment for our body, for our soul, for our mind, for our spirit, for our consciousness to survive, we all need to reconnect with food. And this is why I think this word regenerative is beautiful. And the soil is regenerative, nature is regenerative. And when we can create our economy regenerative, cyclical economy, where whatever we take from nature, we celebrate with gratitude and we put back something in nature, and everything goes back into nature and comes back from nature. If this can be a cycle of life and a regenerative economy and regenerative agriculture, then I think there's a future. So I try to practice. I'm 84 and still I feel healthy and enjoying life and working because of my garden. Because I work in the garden, I go out in nature. Whenever I have my mental problem, I have some thinking problem or some worry about something, I go in the garden. And garden solves my spiritual problem and my psychological problem. And when I want to think about ideas about writing for researchers, a new article, I go in the garden and think about there. So I think touching the soil and experiencing the contented soil will make you contented. So thank you for giving that wonderful phrase of contented soil. I celebrate that and I thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Satish. And I love the way you've developed that idea. I would just add, though, that if you don't have the possibility of having a garden because you live in a block of flats or something, you can always grow seeds. You can always cultivate seeds. You can put bean sprouts and all sorts of sprouts, so you can see growth and then eat the seeds as well. if you don't have the chance of having a garden. But no, well said. So now we're going over to Helen Browning, the director of the Soil Association. We're very delighted to be able to be working with the Soil Association on this event. And of course, some historical references have already been made to Eve Balfour. So, Helen.
Thank you. Goodness me, I've also inspired by Vandana and by Satish. It's just wonderful to hear you this morning and the eloquence which you describe how we've got to where we are today. And some of the origins, as you say, of the Soil Association, tracking right back to the work of Albert Howard. Thank you so much for bringing that to life so brilliantly this morning. And I think that connection, you know, the Soil Association is 75 years old this year, and that connection, that fundamental mission that we have to connect, to understand the connectedness between the health of soil, plants, animals, and humanity. You know, it's just as relevant today as it was then. I think it's an extraordinary thing to be standing at a moment where finally, I think more and more people are understanding this. It does feel as though the world is waking up to the fact that we have become disconnected from nature in the way that you describe. And it's a really hard moment in lots of ways, because I think we all sense that real urgency. We've got this 1 decade to kind of turn the oil tanker, that's a terrible analogy, turn all of this around. But we also need to be living in a way, in that contentedness, that appreciation that Satish describes so well. And I think in a lot of us, there's that tension between the need to kind of, you know, be grounded in what's real and to be doing the things that we can do, but also to be doing everything we can to be bringing about that change. So I think it's really hard when people are starting to wake up to this. How do we collectively, how do we support, inspire and harness the energy that's starting to be unleashed around the world? I think it's a huge irony actually at the Soil Association, despite our 75 years, I'm almost ashamed to say that we only have 10 or 11,000 members as a charity. And a lot of people will say to me, it's because you do too many things. You work with the farmers, you work with the foresters, you work with the school cooks, you work with the policymakers. People can't get their heads around the fact that you are so complex, and you're, you know, if you were just saving the panda, it would be so much easier for people to get behind what you do. But I have to keep pushing back and say that actually everything is connected. We have to work on so many fronts at the same time. We have to be working with the farmers, helping them to share what they're learning, helping them to learn new ways of doing things, because we're all needing to learn a lot at the moment. What we've done in the past in organic farming isn't nearly enough actually to regenerate the world as we need it into the future. We've got to continue to innovate. We need to be working with the school cooks. If we don't feed our children well into the future now, if we don't actually do that practical hard work of enabling our children to learn to grow, to learn to cook, to make their own bread. I know Satish often talks about making bread, and to get them onto their farms, to get them into nature, to help them connect with so many children just don't have that opportunity. So we have to work with them, and we have to work with policymakers. We have to actually say, look, guys, this stuff works. We might not be able to change the whole paradigm overnight, but we have to convince people that now making the investments in our soil, making the investments in our children, doing that is the only way that we will actually have a healthy and secure world going forward. So that's a real challenge to me. And I think when we look forward now, there's also a danger that people get into their camps. They, you know, we've all had to be campaigners, and that's really good. We're going to need to continue to be campaigners, but we also need to be really practical people, actually doing things fast now, planting those trees, rewilding those areas, growing that fantastic food, showing what's possible. And we need to make sure that as everybody locks into climate change as the big threat, that we don't end up with forgetting about nature, that we don't forget about feeling about the health, and more than just physical health, but the whole well-being of mankind. We don't forget about animal welfare and all the dreadful things we've done to many of the other species that we depend on. So we need to keep making sure that we don't let the world get a one-track mind, that we need to keep this holistic spirit so alive, the things that you've both talked about so compellingly this morning. We need to keep the world honest around some of those things. So I think it's an amazing time coming up, huge responsibility for all of us to do everything that we can, but also to do this in a way where we embody those values as we actually take them forward into the world. How we give everybody a route into a better future, because if we put people in the box that's the bad box, actually now they will just fight and stop the progress. We need to find a route forward, this just transition that so many people are talking about, and to assume actually that people fundamentally are good, that people fundamentally want the right things. They've got trapped within a system which hasn't given them the opportunity to be exposed to some of the things that we have been lucky enough to be exposed to, and to give everybody a route through and a practical series of things that they can do so that we can bring about the regeneration that you've both talked so brilliantly about this morning. Thank you both so much.
Thank you so much, Helen. And I think maybe we could all get behind a term such as the regeneration revolution. And I know that some people have been using that kind of phrase. And you're right that we need a very simple kind of messaging for people to understand all the connections as well. And this morning I was just working on some of my posters for my Sustainable Futures Inspiring Purpose program. And one of the children had a diagram of how all these species were connected. And so she was concerned about elephants, but also tigers and orangutans and the frogs and all sorts of other species. And so it's this understanding the whole that I think we've all been talking about in different ways. And that's so we need to think about how to bring things together and meet people where they are, which is I had lunch with Fred Matzer from the Fred Foundation yesterday, and that's one of his fundamental principles, is how do you meet people where they are. I won't go into any more detail at this point. I'll hand over to Colin from the Real Farming Trust and author of The Great Rethink, about which we had a course in April. Colin.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this. It's a great honor to be part of this lineup. The trouble is, of course, that the other three speakers, particularly Vandana, have said more or less everything I wanted to say, so I'll just add a few points. The thing is, I think if we're going to put the world to rights, you cannot do anything ad hoc. You cannot put anything to rights ad hoc. Everything, as people have been saying, is related to everything else. And I'll just flash my book, not because I'm trying to plug the book, but to make the point in this diagram, which shows that if we really want to put anything to rights at all, you have to think in terms of reassessing what is our goal, what is we're actually trying to do, what kind of action do we really need to try to meet our goal, what kind of infrastructure do we need in order to support the kind of action that we need in order to reach our goal, and finally, what kind of mindset do we need to initiate or to put in place the kind of infrastructure that we need. And I would say that although the world now contains an encouraging number of avant-garde thinkers, of whom we've seen a good array this morning, the avant-garde thinking has not filtered through to the people who really have power in this world, really have influence in this world. And the next great challenge to me is not simply to sort of clarify and expand the ideas, the kind of ideas that we've been hearing this morning, but to translate that into a paradigm shift that involves the whole world, that involves the whole political system that controls and the economic system that controls the way we work. And I was thinking about this in the context of G7. Now, G7 this year includes a number of really very encouraging people, of who Joe Biden is one, and I've always been a fan of Angela Merkel, seem to me to be not only very clever, but to have their hearts in the right places, which is a huge advance on the years of Donald Trump, very obviously. But nevertheless, it strikes me that they take the G7, what do you call them, delegates together, and none of them really grasp the point. None of them really grasp the point of what Vandana and Satish and Helen have been saying, that we really need to rethink from very, very fundamental first principles and address everything across the board. One of the things is most obvious to me is that agriculture is by far actually the most important thing that human beings do. It's the thing we absolutely have to get right. It's right at the center of all the world's affairs. Whether or not our fellow creatures survive depends to a very large extent on how we choose to farm, and whether or not we can actually feed ourselves and our children and our children's children obviously depends on how we choose to farm. And so you would think, you would hope that agriculture would be right at the heart of all serious political thinking and economic thinking, but actually it isn't. I mean, actually, it's sidelined if you look at the way agriculture is structured, particularly in a country like ours, where one would be saying to oneself, ask first of all the fundamental question, what is agriculture actually for? And I suggest in my book, and I've been suggesting for decades, and so have the other speakers here, that what agriculture is really for is to provide everybody in the world with good food, and to do that without wrecking the rest of the world, and without cruelty, and without injustice. Now, the sort of sad and shocking thing, or it's a cheering, but it's a shocking thing, is that that should be very easy technically. And largely it's a question, as Vandana said, of building on the ancient wisdom, adding a little science just to sort of, as it were, enhance the ancient wisdom. And that's not how science, that's not how agriculture is regarded. It's not how it's seen. Agriculture is seen by governments like ours and by the corporates and by their chosen advisors. In other words, by what one might call the powers that be. It's seen just as another way of making money, another way of fitting in with the global economy. In other words, the whole thing is sort of squeezed through the neoliberal mindset, the economic system which says that the work of the economy is to maximize and concentrate wealth. I'm inclined to say, no wonder the world is in a mess. We have to start again from very first principles and ask what agriculture is for, and then having established that it's actually for, it's about producing good food and about enhancing the biosphere, the living world, ask how to go about it. And as all the speakers have said, really agriculture in the end is a matter of looking after the soil. As Yves Balfour said, look after the soil and the crops will take care of themselves. And it's true. And as Vandana and everyone else emphasized, Yves Balfour in turn was inspired by Albert Howard, who was the first person really to sort of start establishing the idea of organic farming and the idea of composting and so on, ideas that he actually got from India. Now, if you switch from the idea that agriculture is just another way of making money, a business like any other, as the expression has it, to the idea that we really need that agriculture is about producing good food and looking after the biosphere, this is not just a change of, it's not just a change of an idea, it is what the American philosopher Thomas Kuhn called a paradigm shift. It requires a whole shift in mindset. And the point is that if you look at all the details of what you need to bring about this grand paradigm shift, you find that you need paradigm shifts all the way down the line. So if we say, for example, that agriculture is primarily about looking after the soil, one of the things that's striking is that at least among avant-garde thinkers, who don't include, unfortunately, the powers that be, but at least among avant-garde thinkers, you find that over the last 50 or 60 years, which is the kind of time I've been studying biology, including soil, there have been a series of huge paradigm shifts, very encouragingly. So that when I first started looking at soil, or was told about it at school in the 1950s and early 60s, soil science was treated as an exercise in chemistry. As Vandana said, NPK and manganese and potassium and a few other, well, iron and a few other things was what it was about. And what we've seen in the last 20 years, or really since the growth of the Soil Association more than anything, is the idea that soil science isn't just a matter of chemistry, it's a matter of soil biology. And biology cannot simply be reduced to chemistry, which is the old sort of reductionist idea. It has its own rules, it works in its own way. And the particular sciences that we need, well, the ground science that we need is that ecology, so that science, soil science now is not seen as an exercise in chemistry by advanced thinkers, it's seen as an exercise in ecology. And in particularly, it's seen as an exercise in the ecology of microorganisms, in particular, as Vandana said, of bacteria and fungi, and in particular, the fungi of the mycorrhizae, which form the symbiotic relationships with the roots of plants. Out of that comes another paradigm shift. Again, when I was first studying biology in the mid-20th century, what dominated the whole thinking was a kind of crude parody of Darwin. I don't think it was really Darwin, it was a crude parody of Darwin, which said that life is just one long competition. And one of the things that come out of modern ecology, and I would say in particular, modern ecology of the soil, is the realization that biological systems, ecosystems, are fundamentally cooperative. And I would like to say, okay, competition is a fact of life, and it's actually quite a positive fact of life, but actually life, the norm of life is cooperation. Life is fundamentally cooperative. Now, this is a kind of idea, again, as I say, a paradigm shift, which goes beyond biology and into moral philosophy, insofar as moral philosophy is based in an idea of what's natural, because one begins to see that the general idea of moral philosophy, which is that we should cooperate and be nice to each other and all the rest of it, is actually perfectly well in line with ecological principles, which ought at least to be encouraging. And then you say, and yet, for example, the economy, particularly the neoliberal economy, is based on the idea that we all have to compete with each other to get richer and richer and richer, personal acquisition, etc. And yet, if you start with the proposition that actually life and therefore morality should be fundamentally cooperative, then you say, no, actually we need a cooperative economy, and so on and so on and so on. On the particular matter of the microbes, not only do we see wonderful symbiotic relationships between bacteria and plants and between fungi and plants, but more generally, we see that actually the ecology of the whole world, including us, is driven by microbes. And as Vandana said, we now realize more and more how important the gut microbes are. And again, when I was first studying biology, nutrition itself was seen as an exercise in chemistry, and basically protein-backed carbohydrates, vitamins, and that kind of stuff. And now again, it's seen as an exercise in ecology, an ecology of the gut. And as Tim Spector says in his rather wonderful book, The Diet Myth, feed the gut microbes, basically is saying the same as Yves Balfour said in the context of soil: look after the gut microbiota and the nutritional will look after itself. It's a complete shift of mindset.
Thank you very much, Colin. I think we'll, if I may, just interrupt you there. You made some very important connecting points there, but before we break, I want to go back to Vandana to see if she'd like to pick up any of the points that the panel has made, and then we'll take a break and come back to questions and further panel discussion.
No, I think we can go ahead. Thank you. I just want to thank them. Yeah.
Okay, well, in that case, let's take 10 minutes of further exchange between the panel members. Who'd like to come in on any of the points that have been raised? I just make the point that in France, organic agriculture is called biologique. So les produits bio, and so that makes exactly the distinction that Colin's been making between chemical and biological.
I mean, what I would like to say, David, is that agriculture is a science, but it's more than science, it's a way of life. And at the moment, it seems that our society thinks that growing food is for those either by the machine or by those who are not clever, uneducated, undeveloped, backward, rural people who don't know how to do banking or legal systems or intellectual thinking and so on. If you are backward and not clever, then you do some farming and you are poorly paid. So we have lost the dignity in growing food and working on land. And therefore farmers don't want their children in England, especially where I'm living in Devon. Devon is a very much farming country. Farmers don't want their children to stay in agriculture because agriculture has no value. So agriculture is science, of course, but and biology and all those things are fine, but it's a way of life. That's what I would like to say. Agriculture should be seen as a way of life, and we need to bring back dignity to working with the soil, working on the land. Growing food is as important, if not more important, than being a lawyer or a doctor or a professor or a banker or a politician. That's way of life. That's what I would like to suggest.
Thank you. Anyone like to take that point up? Helen, I mean, you're a farmer as well.
I am a farmer, and I think one of the challenges that we have in farming in the UK in particular is that the paradigm has been specialization and scale. And there's still quite a war going on at the moment about whether the future should be more scale and more specialization, or actually whether there's another model which allows new people to come in and for us to have many more people who are starting to get involved with growing things. I'm really keen to see the opportunity for people to start on smaller blocks of land, on small holdings. Many more people need to get involved, because actually the complex systems we're talking about here need a lot of attention. They need people to make them work, and people who've got a whole range of skills. It is not enough just to get the agronomist in and tell you what to spray, and you're doing that over 1,000 acres and it's all treated in the same way. The new kind of farming that we need to do, and the old kind of farming we need to bring into the future, requires so many more skills, and we're going to have to learn some new stuff. Even as a farmer, I've been farming organically for 35 years, but I'm right now learning a whole load of new things, which will be required to really find that balance between sorting out climate, feeding enough people really fantastic nutrient dense food. I love Vandana talking about nutrients or health per acre. That's a really important concept, because it's all been about yield. So it's going to need more people. I think more people would like to get involved, but we need to give that opportunity. And we do need to get away from this idea that it's all about specialization and scale, because actually small is beautiful in many ways within the kind of farming systems that we're going to need into the future.
So it's really, we're coming back to mindset, and I'm reminded of a couple of incidents and points made in Colin Tudge's course that we did. And one is to do with driverless tractors. You know, we talk driverless cars, we have driverless tractors. And so the farmer will be in his office, you know, driving the machine, or maybe it be driving itself. And again, this is a further detachment from the whole process. But what really struck me was one of his correspondents, and Colin will remember the name, who was speaking from the south of Scotland. She said that there was this man on a tractor, and he was in the middle of a combine harvester, and he was in the middle of harvesting his field, and suddenly the engine stopped and he couldn't start it again. So he rang the people up in Holland, apparently, And they said, yes, you're behind on your payments. And so we've just stopped your tractor. And so one harvester. So the idea that from a central place, somebody can press a button and disable your machine, I find that really quite staggering.
Yeah. Sorry, just to come back on the driverless tractor type things, I think that there will be advances in technology that actually will help us manage the land and provide these kind of benefits in a more holistic way. One of the big problems we've had over the last few decades is that everybody's got these tractors that get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
More and more and more. So actually the idea of being able to actually have small scale machines that can do some of the picking or the weeding or whatever, and are small enough not to compact the soil and to move in those more complex environments without actually having to knock down the hedges and trees to make it possible to use the technology. Some of these things could really be helpful and make it get that balance between, because some of the systems we're running, I'm starting an agroforestry system here, they are very labor intensive. So if we can combine some of the technologies in the right way, it could be quite exciting.
Yeah, I think that's that's interesting. And certainly if you have special tractors for vineyards, for instance, and one of the things happening in France is a huge resurgence of biodynamics. And some of the main chateaux in Bordeaux, like Pont-et-Canet, are now only using horses in the vineyards, because they realize that the tractors have compacted the soil. The soil is what gives the terroir to the grapes, and then that in turn produces the very interesting and delicious wine. So I think these other developments going on as well. But I think you're right. There's a synergistic aspect, and we need to be very careful about how the synergy is going to work, so that we're not completely submerged in the large scale. As you said, the economies of scale, which I learned in my course in economics. So I think we'll just take a 5-minute break now, and so we can all sort of have a stretch, maybe get out into our garden for a moment if we have one, and so I'll see you back at 40, whatever time zone you're in.
And if the toxics gave you cancer, then you have a 7.6% risk of morbidity. So we put ourselves outside the food chain. And now we're trying to do it to other animals who are our relatives. No farming system is there without animals. I mean, people were talking about bringing the horses back. I think you talked about vineyards where the horses have come back. Wendell Berry only farms with horses because he's an ecologist, and he's, in my view, the best writer and farmer of America. Indian farming wouldn't have worshipped the cow as sacred mother. If I was in Delhi, what you'd see behind me would be cows, all over cows. And why is the cow so sacred? Because unless you're in extremely wet regions, this recycling of organic matter via animals is vital. But if you go to arid zones, recycling of all biomass, remember Howard, leaf, the sun, the leaf, the green leaf, the grass, and then recycling. So in areas where there isn't enough water, you cannot do crop farming. That's why most of the people in the world are pastoralists in dry lands, whether it be the Tibetan Plateau, or it be the arid areas of Central Asia, or it be most of Africa. So I think, Colin talked about this very narrow way of thinking, the limited mindset, and I call it the mechanistic reductionist mindset. And mechanistic reductionist system takes complex ecosystems, complex systems, living systems, and reduces them either to one feature, a one-dimensional feature, or one factor, one function. And that's where we start to get into problem. And another very important word Colin used is abstractions. I've called them illusions in my book, Oneness versus 1%. Because if you debate abstractions, you'll never have resolution. Yeah, because my abstraction versus your abstraction. And it depends who has the bigger loudspeaker. behind the abstraction.
Yeah.
But when you're really digging, as you yourself said, anyone who's actually doing pastoralism in Africa has no problem. There's no debate. So I think it's important for those who don't engage in something with their full being, not just their brains, an disembodied brain, with their full being. If they engage with their full being, that's the real test of whether the dialogue will be truthful dialogue. Otherwise, it's just propaganda versus propaganda, abstraction versus abstraction, and superiority versus superiority. My assumption is superior to your assumption, and no way of testing out, again, as Colin said, whether it's ecologically true or not. So I think the real test is, A, we need animals on the land. B, in arid zones, animals are very, very important. Pastoralists have to be respected. You cannot say, let the pastoralists disappear from this world and still have food. Dry lands only support pastoralism.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anyone else like to make a point there before we go on to Thomas?
I think, if I may, David, I think it's very much about thinking about what's the right thing to do in the right place. I think Vandana's made that point really clearly. I think Alan Savory's work is really interesting, and I completely agree that animals have a role in farming systems, a really important role. I think there's no doubt that we need to get rid of the industrial farming of livestock.
Exactly.
Exactly. On concrete, fed the soya that's coming out of the Amazon, all of the problems that come from industrial farming. So we talk a lot at the Soil Association about less meat. Let's eat less meat and dairy, but let's make sure we keep it in the right kind of way. And I think that we're still learning a lot about some of the techniques that Alan Savory promotes. I think the sort of mob stocking and the deferred grazing, your grasses rest and grow a lot taller. There's definitely a lot of advantages from using those kind of techniques in a lot of places. But I do think in the UK, we need actually a good evidence base. I was so pleased to hear Vandana talking about some of the experiments, the measurements you're getting from the work that you're doing, because we need to actually understand better what's the right thing to do in the right place. And at the moment, I think we have too many farmed animals. We are farming so many animals. They outweigh wild animals by 50 times or whatever it might be, much more than that. It's just ridiculous. So we've got to kind of get animals playing their right role. And I agree for a lot of our grasslands, maintaining an animal population will be very important, but it's not it's an issue that gets very polarized, the whole meat and livestock debate. And I think we need to rebalance that, and it's somewhere in the middle here where animals play the right role, where they don't compete with humans for food, where we're not feeding them loads of cereals and soya, but we are using them to sustain the biodiversity, recycle nutrients, and in many cases they can help us rebuild soils. So it's going to be an important balance to get this stuff working well.
And it's synergistic, isn't it? And it's working with nature rather than trying to control and this huge scale of these CAFOs, these concentrated animal feed operations, and the waste they produce. And it's an enormous issue, but it's driven by demand. People need to stop eating the stuff.
Yeah,
and that raises all sorts of other issues. Let's go on to Thomas, who's joining us from France. Thomas Daffin.
Right, greetings, hello. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
I just want to say what a brilliant conversation it's been to listen to, and all the speakers, particularly Vandana. You're really on the ball here. What I was thinking as you were talking was I was brought up in a traditional British education with the concept that the agricultural revolution represented progress. This was the way forward. This was, a benefit. And of course, then it spreads around the earth. Now, you presented the complete inverse of that narrative. And it doesn't take much to convince me. I'm already, signed up to that. However, with the agricultural revolution, also came the industrial revolution, and also came knowledge specialization. The whole system of modernity, which Marx analyzed in Das Kapital, but didn't complete his analysis, shows us that hyper-specialization is what makes this whole thing possible. And in academia, I've worked in education, I'm looking at this in academia, you have to hyper specialize to be taken seriously. You got your PhD because you did that. You have to play the game. The problem we're facing, however, is that hyper specialization type knowledge won't solve this problem. We've heard from Colin again, he's a polymath, he's a genius, as is Vandana, as is Satish, as is everyone. So my question to the panel is, how can we validate or make acceptable the idea that it is important to specialize now in the whole? I mean, Colin says we should go back to ecology as the science of the whole. I beg to slightly differ. I think we have to include philosophy, metaphysics, theology, spirituality, psychology. If we're talking about the whole, we have to include the actual whole, including all the sciences and ecology. But there is no recognized name for this. Can we invent, and I think the SciMed network are helping, invent a new specialism of the whole? And what would you call it? What would you call it?
Thank you very much, Thomas. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, all I will say is, you know, India as a sophisticated civilization never gave one name to anything. So everything has 1,000 names. The Ganges has 1,000 names. The Divine Feminine has 1,000 names. We call it Bahuda. And why do we call it Bahuda? Because if it's just one name, and then the superiority problem starts, you know, my name is superior. And I have painfully watched the agroecology movement fight within itself the last 50 years. You know, the biodynamics and the permaculture and the organic, and last year they unleashed a natural zero budget, Bill Gates inspired farming in India to attack organic. And we have to stand, you know, and in India, they talk about organic as an imported concept. And I have to repeatedly say, but Albert Howard, made Indian peasants, his professor, this is our learning gone to the world. So I would say, don't look for one name. Look for the multiple practices and the multiple names that will emerge, because diversity is the nature of nature. And any expression that emerges from that experience of working in the whole with nature will have many languages. In France, there'll be many languages. In England, there'll be, and let them all have only one harmonious objective, as I think Colin laid it out. What is the end? The end should be harmony with nature, respect for nature. And then all of the disciplines will find their right place and the harmony will come.
Right.
That's the Prince of Wales's term, isn't it? That's his key term, is harmony. Colin.
Yes, I also can't come up with a single name, Thomas, but what we are actually trying to do, that is to say I and some friends, is establish a new college, which is called the College for Real Farming and Food Culture, which tries to do precisely what you're suggesting, which is to give a kind of, for want of a better word, holistic overview of what the world is really like and what its problems really are and how we approach them. And I suppose the central idea is that, well, not only do we have to talk about science becomes only a part of the whole search for what one might properly call wisdom, and the real, and this kind of discussion and the whole effort of the scientific and medical network, as I see it, is to try and get a handle on what wisdom really means when defined in a broader context. But then the problem for the world is to translate wisdom into, well, I would say, into political and economic action. And for me, the almost number one task is to reconcile the kind of nonsense of present day economics, basically neoliberal economics, and present day politics, which is very hierarchical and competitive and so on, with the kind of ideas that are emerging from this kind of discussion about the need for ecology, the need for cooperation, the need for oneness, etc.
But also, David,
Yeah.
How you interpret a word depends what you mean by it. When you say ecology, ecos means home. Home has everything. Home has relationships. Home has has a garden, home has kitchen, home has bathroom, home has toilet, home has everything. So when you say ecos, home, if our whole planet is our home, and whole cosmos is our country, and whole nature is our family, and loving everything is our religion, then ecology is quite a good title for that. In a way, I don't think we need to ecology of nature, ecology of love, ecology of spirit, ecology of everything. So ecos, home, it's a very beautiful word. So, I mean, I agree with Vandana. We need to celebrate diversity, and we don't need to always get stuck with language and words. But if you have to have a word, if you are looking for the word, Thomas, but I would say, like Colin also said, that the ecology is a good word to bring everything holistically together.
Thank you, Satish. Now, I've just put into the chat a different suggested spelling. So it starts with O-E-K, ology. So it becomes homology, if you like, or so it's an adaptation of
homology. Okay.
Yeah, ecology. Yeah. Yes, thank you very much for that. Thomas, would you like to come back on any of those points just briefly?
Yes, I hope you can hear me. I think Colin's point is critical because politics and economics depend on this hyper specialization. I mean, Boris Johnson is an intellectual nincompoop who got to power because of the party's monolithic structure. And we're seeing this all over the world. People come to power in politics by gaming democracy using digital control, Cambridge Analytica, etc. They've invented a system whereby that hyper specialization that runs the corporate sector and the banking sector and now the political sector can literally game the planet. So the problem is, how can, if we rethink and put the wholeness of things forefront, including ecology, nature, and all the rest of it, how can that voice possibly be heard in the current geopolitical system? The G7 is the summit of the summit, and it's all premised on this hyper specialization. So, and that's
Thomas,
about power, naked power pursuit.
Yeah,
Thomas.
Yeah.
I don't think the real revolution and change is going to come from G7. Forget G7. Forget the centers of power. The real change and revolution comes from the grassroots, from the fringe. Mahatma Gandhi did not come from the White House. Martin Luther King did not come from the 10 Downing Street. Vandana Shiva is not coming from the Parliament of New Delhi. The real change and revolution will not, don't put your attention on G7. They will be the last to change. The real change will come from the grassroots when you and I and millions of people go do gardening and live good life. And then we will see that center will change a little bit, but even center will lag behind. People have to be always leader. So I would not put too much faith in G7 and Boris Johnson or Modi or any of these people. They will be the last to change. It is the people, grassroots level, activists, you and I, we have to take the leadership and change from the bottom up rather than this top-down idea. So forget G7. They are not going to change and lead the world.
Yeah, wonderful, Satish, and beautifully said with appropriate passion. Let's go on to Pam now. Where are you coming in from, Pam?
I'm in Sussex in England, very rural spot in Sussex. My background's microbiome. I'm a microbiologist. I'm of Colin Tudge's era, one of my heroes, I have to say, Colin and Helen Browning. And like him, my biological education was so similar. The great pesticide revolution, the green revolution. And quite early on, I joined the Soil Association. And the answer, as they say, lies in the soil. It's so easy to get depressed. It really is. But I'm also a beekeeper and in the British Beekeeping Association. And that means, obviously, I take keen interest in the pesticide and what's happening in farming. And in the last year or so, I've been following the Farmers Weekly. And it's made it quite clear, although I suppose I already knew this, so much of the food in the UK comes from the East Anglia and Essex and Cambridgeshire. And that's the area that has very few animals. When you go there, it's appallingly depressing. These great long rows, no hedges, no trees, really terribly depressing, I find. And they're heavily devoted to chemicals. And I think there have been reports of how the soil has become depleted. But just recently, I've been quite encouraged. There have been some articles in Farmers Weekly where, guess what? A Norfolk farmer has discovered something called clover. And he's discovered that apparently this amazing stuff puts nitrogen into the soil. And he's actually written this great article about how he can cut his costs by using clover. And it is amazing that they don't know these fundamentals. I don't know, Colin might have some comments here. How do you get it through to farmers? Or Helen? I was fortunate enough to visit Helen's wonderful farm about nearly 20 years ago. And they don't seem aware of the basics, that they can save money by stopping using so much artificials and going back to a bit more mixed land, because they've got no animals to put manure on. So that does make it more difficult. But I think he actually stated he was using more and more and more artificials and pesticides and not really getting anywhere. And related to that is the problem you probably mostly all heard about with the neonicotinoids, where we thought they'd been banned, and then they DEFRA and the National Farmers Union decided they were going to use them again. But there was such an outcry. This was for sugar beet. And again, in Farmers Weekly, you found there were some farmers who were getting round the problem of not being able to use the pesticides or buy treated seed by their technology, by undersowing with other crops and by using foliar feeds. And they were actually able, I think one farmer in Lincolnshire almost broke the world record for his oilseed rape, purely by changing the system he was using. So I felt there are some straws in the wind, but how do you get it through to those farmers?
Thank you, Pam. Who'd like to respond to that one?
For a moment, I mean, I think it's really interesting to see what's happening in the farming community in the UK at the moment. And you're absolutely right. I've also found it very depressing going into the eastern counties historically, where they were really in denial. If I was invited over there, it was really, I was there to sport. Let's have a real, let's sort of, give Helen a hard time, because, actually everything's fine here. Our soils are just there to prop up the plants, carry on in the way that we're going for another goodness knows how long. In the last 5 or 6 years, I think the mood music has really changed, even in the east of England, because the soils are definitely running out of steam. The organic matter levels are down to 1.5%, even lower than that. And the chemistry, all these chemicals aren't working anymore. They've got black grass, their rotations, they've been doing if they've done rotations at all, it's been wheat, oilseed rape, forever. And it's not working anymore. So suddenly we're finding actually there's a whole bunch of farmers, not just the people you'd expect, coming to us and saying, okay, we think we've got something to learn from you organic nutters who we've been giving a hard time to all these years. And one of the things we're thinking about really hard is how do we enable many more of those farmers to get the information they need. Now, they often actually, I think farmers, and I speak myself sometimes, we take information best from other farmers. So we're putting together a network which allows not just organic farmers, but non-organic farmers too, who want to shift in the right direction, to get that knowledge and to learn from what their peers are doing. Because there's a whole bunch of guys and girls out there at the moment that are doing really exciting new work on things like agroforestry, you know, bringing trees into our crop fields, regenerative grazing systems, pasture cropping, some really big breakthroughs. We run a program called Innovative Farmers, which actually supports farmer groups to come together to learn how to do knowledge-based improvements to their farming systems. So things like the oilseed rape problem that you mentioned, there was a group that came together to learn how, if they grazed their oilseed rape with sheep over the winter, whether that would reduce the cabbage flea beetle pest, and lots of other things we're experimenting with. So we need this kind of center now. We need a place where people can come and learn, where they can see what other people are doing, where we can do the right kind of research, because all of the research that's been done has been done away from the farm, with intellectual property as the main kind of gain we want to achieve. So we need practical research that's being done at the farm level, and we need to share that amongst all these farmers who are suddenly recognizing that actually the system is broken, they do need to change, but they're going to need a lot of hand holding and support to make those changes. So
I'm sure that's right. Colin.
That's out.
One of the depressing things about Pam's contribution is that she said that the farmer who wrote the piece in Farmers Weekly, I used to work for Farmers Weekly, it was a jolly good little magazine in those days, early 70s. Anyway, that he was persuaded in the end to take clover seriously because he saved money. And what strikes me as being the most depressing thing is that people, that's what, and I'd quite like to ask Helen particularly, do you think that the kind of change that we need in farming can be achieved so long as we have an economy which is geared so much to maximization of wealth, and so long as farming is treated as a business like any other and is required to maximize its income?
I guess we can make improvements within the current paradigm, but that does require a lot of the time us talking in the language of money. So we'll wait before you pull your face. Let's get to the end of what I'm trying to say. I mean, I think that at the moment we have to do what we can within the world that we live in. So I think there's, for instance, a really interesting debate around things like biodiversity net gain and offsetting and all these kind of things, which could put more money to drive better environmental performance within farming, because farmers will need to try and make a living out of what they're doing. But I do kind of agree that the system itself doesn't put the right values at the heart of it, doesn't allow us to invest in the right ways. I think the question for us is how much attention, given the urgency, do we put into working with what we've got and improving what we've got as fast as we can. That does mean sometimes putting a financial value on things that shouldn't really have a financial value attached to them because they are just inherently important. And how much attention do you put into revolutionizing the world and coming up with a whole new framework, which might take us almost longer than we've got? I guess we need to be doing a bit of both. We need to be working in the existing paradigm and using whatever tools we've got to make change happen as fast as it can, whilst also calling for social inequalities to be addressed and to look at the whole capitalist model and whether that can really work in the medium term. So I think I think we have to do both. Utopia won't come within the current framework, but we can probably make some progress, and we need to make progress very quickly.
Yes, very pragmatic.
I'm a pragmatist.
Yes, but I can understand that point. I just want to bring in Sagar's point again. He's got an extensive contribution here, really bringing in this whole notion of non-violence as a fundamental attitude. I know that your recent book, Vandana, brings in your different forms of your different S's, including satyagraha, as a basis for a new attitude to nature and agriculture. Maybe you'd like to say something about that.
Yeah, I'll connect that to the discussion in the last round. That, part of what I've tried to address in that book is how we have many economies, and the word economy, and ecology. Sundarlal Bahuguna just passed away, and he always said ecology is the permanent economy. And Kumarappa, one of Gandhi's close associates, wrote the economy of permanence. And for the economy of permanence, you definitely have to have circularity in it, the giving back. And because all extraction is linear extraction, it doesn't know how to count what's given back. And it doesn't know non-linear equations at all. So we, in addition to our health per acre, we did a book called Wealth Per Acre, where we took all the externalities of industrial chemical farming. And for India, we just harm to farmers, harm to biodiversity, harm to animals. It's $1.3 trillion a year. Yeah. So just the social and ecological costs are as much as the GDP, but you add to that health. I mean, everyone I know who had a relative go into hospital and die, they are stuck with 2 million, 3 million rupee debts. And there's no way in Indian society you can pay that kind of debt without losing your home, losing your farm, etc. So the true cost accounting is very important. And of course, the farmers have been put into such a corner that they want to just stay alive right now. And in the staying alive, to repay their debt, they're having to look for more money. Two things. Our calculations are showing that the more you get locked into global supply chains with high cost production, not only are you in debt, you receive 1 to 4% of the value of what the consumer pays. Whereas if you sell directly, and even in a poor village, and we do this, even in the village, the farmer's income goes up by selling to another farmer in the village. So we've forgotten local circular economies, and we have to build them back. What's keeping people going right now is these community-supported agriculture, local food economies, and these have exploded during the COVID crisis. Yeah, while the abstract debates have carried on, as people have become ill, and they're looking for good food to have better health, local farms have just grown. And I think we need to take much more seriously that economy that is growing in any case. And that economy is a non-violent economy. Because if you look at the industrialized, globalized system, we talked about the GMO in soya in the Amazon, violence against the forest, violence against the indigenous people, violence against all of the planet with the infectious diseases, violence against the animals and the factory farms. I think we should, instead of debating whether free-range animals should exist or not, or pastoralism should exist or not, I think we should have only one common decision. Factory farms don't have a place in a living economy, in a non-violent economy. That's the only debate, not even a debate, that's the only commitment we need, a common commitment. So non-violence is for sure the yardstick. And the non-violence part of it has to be, like was said, of the full system. There's no point killing the monarch butterfly, wiping out all the biodiversity, spraying Roundup, having GMO soya that totally kills your gut microbiome, and saying, I am eating plant-based, meat. I think that's fooling oneself. We have to look at the systems non-violence, systemic non-violence. But Satish knows that systemic non-violence is the only place where you get true courage to say no to the wrong thing. And that is the ultimate economic step. When you just know this is wrong and I'm not going to participate. And so what non-violence will have to be a very, very important place for creativity, for another path, and courage to say no to the wrong things.
Thank you. Satish, I'm sure you'd love to come in on that, because this is absolutely essential to your own philosophy. Is he there?
Yeah, principle of non-violence at every level. Non-violence to nature, non-violence to animals. Like doctors take Hippocratic oath when they graduate and before they begin their practice. I think that Hippocratic oath is a kind of principle of non-violence. Do no harm. Do no harm to land, to forest, to animals, to people, and to yourself, including non-violence. Go to yourself. And so if we can establish this idea of Hippocratic oath, not only for the doctors, but also farmers have to take that oath. Also the people in the industry and business and in politics, if all people who start to work in the world, before they begin their career or begin their jobs or whatever, their profession, and should be not a profession, but should be vocation, because non-violence is connected with vocation rather than profession. If we took that Hippocratic oath of doing no harm to nature and no harm to people and no harm to yourself, I think we will have a wonderful agriculture, because nature is abundant. There is no shortage. If we plant one seed, Vandana is the champion of seed saving, one seed has the potential to become an orchard. One seed will produce thousands of apples, and then all those apples have a further seeds, and you can have an orchard. So nature is abundant, there's no shortage. So the economist and our modern economy has created this idea of shortage. So the abundance comes from this generosity of spirit, and non-violence is a fundamental principle for that. If we can bring Hippocratic oath to everybody, that'll be a good start of doing no harm. Thank you.
Wonderful, Satish. And I'm just thinking about the cherry tree of my neighbor, and with this wonderful crop this year. And of course, we as humans can only reach up so far unless we climb into the tree. And I said to my wife, you know, there's plenty for us and plenty for the birds.
Exactly.
Yeah. So if we just, we'll take one final question from Laura, who looks as if she's outside, maybe even on a bicycle. Laura.
Here I am. A really inspiring talk. Thank you very much. I just wanted to get the panel's ideas for what they would like to see happening to grow the grassroots movement. You know, particularly in post-COVID interest in local food and local systems.
Yes, thank you very much.
How can we all work together? What can we all do to contribute to that agenda?
I think I'll ask the panel to address that question at the same time as any further sort of summary messages that you'd like to think. So we're coming to the end of our time together. So who'd like to go first?
I'll go first.
Yeah, okay, Vandana, yes.
Yeah. So I think the first thing is everyone's always made to feel extremely poor, but there's $700 billion being spent for subsidies for the wrong kind of agriculture. And that's our money. It's public money. And I think we need a much, much more democratic discussion on how public money is spent. I would love to see how young people are given fellowships and internships and apprenticeship to work on land. They're longing to. When I used to travel and, you know, before lockdown, and if I ever asked a hall full of young people in universities, 90% would like to be farmers if they could. And that is where we have to close that broken gap, because land itself is becoming the biggest asset. Bill Gates is now the biggest landlord. And if we don't find creative ways to redistribute and share the land as a commons, and Satish's beginning after leaving Jain, being a Jain monk, was in the Bhudan movement, such an important movement, an inspiration from the world. And I hope Satish will share with all of you why land as a gift, land as a commons is so important today. The second big thing is, we've said it all again and again and again, gardens everywhere. Don't wait, just start gardens. And the third is the connection between the soil, between the farmer and our health is the one health we all need to work towards. And I think it's very important for those who like to work in policies at the council level or regional level or national level or wherever. Right now, the global level is totally lost because the UN system is being treated like one little privatized football. I think it's so important to realize that instead of spending more and more money on big pharma, we should be spending much more money on looking after the soil, taking care of our gut microbiome, which will then take care of our health. Now, I know people are doing this in New York, in many states in the US, moving from junk food as the food support and the health. They're moving to diabetes prevention rather than subsidies for diabetes medicine, diabetes prevention through more gardens and local food. So these are the connections: public money redirected, health as the main produce of good farming. Health is the outcome, not the commodity. And finally, realizing that instead of being the lowest in a hierarchical rung, growing good food is our highest dedication and vocation in these times of crisis.
Thank you so much, Vandana. Who'd like to go next?
David, Vandana mentioned and gave me this opportunity to mention this idea of land gift movement. I joined Vinoba Bhave in the land gift movement when I was 18 years old. And the idea was the land does not belong to us. We belong to the land. So there's no ownership of land. There's only relationship with the land. So the idea Vinoba was promoting, and he went to landlords asking them to share their land. It was more than Bhutan, Vandana. It became Gramdan, which means the entire land of the village. And there are, particularly in Odisha, there are many, many thousands of villages. The entire land, nobody owns. All belongs to a trust, village trust. And all the people, if I had previously 100 acres, after the land distribution, I may get only 10 acres. And I'm happy with that. So this is a new consciousness was created. The land does not belong to us. We belong to the land, and we have a relationship with the land, but not ownership of the land. That was the idea. And Vinoba managed to collect 4 million acres of land in gifts, just gifts. People share that land with everybody else. So if we can bring that, Laura, you asked how we can do how we can build a movement at grassroots level, everybody, what can we do? I think we need to do 3 things. I mean, Vandana has already made her list, which is wonderful. I agree and support only. But in addition to what Vandana said, we do 3 things. First of all, we have to start with ourselves. A radiator can radiate the room by being radiator, by being warm itself. If we don't change ourselves, we don't live our own ideals and values, then we are not going to change G7 and Modi and Boris Johnson and anybody else. We have to begin with ourselves. So be the change that you want to see in the world. So everybody who is talking about changing the world, start with yourself. It's all very easy to want to change everybody else. We want to change everybody else, but we don't want to change ourselves. So be the change you want to see in the world. Number 2, we all need to learn to communicate our change. Vandana is wonderful in communicating through her books. Picasso made a great painting to communicate his idea of peace through Guernica. Many singers like John Baez and John Lennon and people like that, they sing, through music, through painting, through anything. Learn to communicate your ideals to other people. Lots of our activists and members of the environmental movement, green movement, ecology movement, don't have skills to communicate. And that's a very great skill. We all can learn how to communicate effectively. And the third is join wherever you are. Join the Soil Association, join Navdanya movement, join Friends of the Earth, join Extinction Rebellion. Don't stay at home and just wish everybody should be right and put them right without joining the great movements around the world. So be the change, communicate the change, and organize the change. These are the 3 things all of us can do at grassroots level. Thank you.
Fantastic, Satish. What a takeaway message we can all apply. Colin or Helen, which would you like to go next?
I can add to what Satish has just said, so thank you very much.
Okay, yes, here. Helen.
Satish said it brilliantly. That's absolutely right. We all need to work out where, having got all those things right, what is our opportunity? What is it I can do? But I think you've just said it so brilliantly, Satish. Lovely, lovely, lovely note to end on.
I very much endorse that, and I'd like to thank the panel, thank Vandana in particular for being the inspiration for this event. Thank the collaboration represented by Satish, the Resurgence Trust, by Helen at the Soil Association, by Colin at the Real Farming Trust and College. And I bring in Colin's word conviviality, which oddly enough he hasn't mentioned during our session, but I feel we have had a very convivial session in that, and a huge amount of material's gone into the chat. I mean, you'll all get the chat. I think when it comes out, I think we normally able to do that. But I just wanted to end by reflecting that you might have noticed that our whole webinar series is called One Mind, One Planet, One Health. And this was a phrase that came originally from Larry Dossey. And Larry Dossey is someone who's majored on the one mind. And this event's been more about the one planet and the one health. But each of these is an expression of oneness, of belonging to the cosmos, belonging to the earth, belonging to each other. And this sense of belonging, I think, is something that we need to cultivate and encourage, so that we get to the third part of the French Revolution, which is all about brother and sisterhood. We belong to each other in that sense. So on that note, I'd like to thank everybody, as I say, for being here.